Hello there. Recently I've been experimenting with time lapses on the Action 5 Pro, and honestly I'm very happy with the results because it's super easy to set up and the image quality is fantastic due to the high resolution 40 megapixel sensor. So let me share with you everything I've learned when it comes to shooting the best looking time lapses with this camera, including the gear, the best camera settings, and of course the post-production workflow. Starting with the gear, the first item you will need is a solid tripod to hold the camera in place. I'm using the Freewell Real Travel Tripod because it's compact and lightweight, but you can use anything really as long as it's going to hold the camera in place. It's going to work just fine. Next, I highly recommend getting ND filters for the Action 5 Pro to add cinematic motion blur to your time lapses. I'm using these Freewell ND PL filters. They range from ND8 to ND64, and each filter also functions as a CPL filter, allowing you to remove reflections from water or windows and reduce glare from the sky. Moving on to camera settings for the resolution and aspect ratio, I'm using 4K with a 4:3 aspect ratio, and the reason for that is because I want to film in the full area of the sensor so I can much easier crop and animate my time lapses in post-production. However, if you don't plan to do that, you can just use the normal 4K 16:9 aspect ratio. As for the frame rate, I'm using here 25 frames per second, but honestly, it doesn't really matter what frame rate you're going to use because anyways, I would recommend shooting raw photos with the time lapses, and then with these raw photos, you can assign them to any frame rate you want, whether it's 24, 25, 30, 50, or 60 frames per second. Moving on to the field of view, I'm using wide field of view, and that's because raw photos only support this field of view. You cannot use raw photos with the standard field of view. And as for the screen settings in here, I use screen off settings, which basically means that as soon as I'm going to start recording my time lapse, the screen is going to turn off and preserve the battery life. Moving on, in here you have a time lapse option or a hyperlapse option. However, I'm not going to focus on hyperlapses in this video. I'm just going to stick to time lapses in this video. Then in here you have a couple of presets to choose from. First you have this cloud preset with a 10-minute video duration and 2-second interval. Then you have the sunset preset with a 1-hour video duration and 3-second interval. And of course you have costume to customize everything exactly how you want, which is what I mostly use. You can swipe up in here and select the video duration and the interval. For the video duration, I mostly use infinity because I want to stop the time lapse whenever I want to, but you can also assign it to a specific video duration. It goes from 5 minutes up to 5 hours, of course, if you have enough space on your card. Also in here, you see this video duration. It will tell you exactly how much of an actual time-lapse video duration you're going to get with this recording. So if you're going to record for 30 minutes with a 2-second interval, you're going to get 36 seconds of an actual time-lapse video duration. So I'm going to set this to infinity because it's more convenient in my opinion. And for the interval, I usually go somewhere between 2 seconds and 10 seconds, depending on how long I'm gonna stay in the location and actually shoot the time lapse. If I'm gonna shoot in a location like this, where there's just people walking around and stuff like that, I would probably go somewhere between 2 to 3 seconds, because usually in places like this, I shoot a time lapse for like 15-20 minutes maximum. However, if I would stay longer, I would put it to somewhere between 4 to 5 seconds. And if I would shoot something like a sunset or sunrise, I would go somewhere between 6 to 10 seconds, again depending on how long I'm gonna stay in the actual location and shoot the time lapse. So let's say I'm gonna stay for like 1 hour, I would set it to about 5-6 seconds. And if I would stay for like 3-4 hours, I would set it to maybe even 10 to 15 seconds. But for the most part, I don't go higher than 10 seconds with my interval when it comes to time lapses. So let me set this to 2 seconds. I think for this location, 2 seconds is going to be more than good enough. And now let's go to the settings in here. First of all, for the format, I'm using video plus RAW. RAW images are going to deliver the best image quality from the Action 5 Pro. And also you will get a stitched video time-lapse file on the side if you want to use that for social media or stuff like that. You also have the option to use just the video format or video plus JPEGs, which I would not recommend doing because JPEGs will deliver much worse image quality than the RAW files. Basically, if you want to achieve the absolute best results when it comes to image quality on the Action 5 Pro with time lapses, you should use video plus RAW and then manually stitch the RAW files in post-production to create your time lapse. There's a plane in here now making noise for me. All right, moving on to white balance. I recommend using manual white balance as much as possible to lock the colors and get the most accurate colors in camera so you won't have to do much fixing in post-production. However, if you are a beginner and not sure which white balance setting to use, I would at least recommend setting the white balance to automatic, let the camera adjust and calibrate the white balance for you, and then switch it back to manual to completely lock the white balance, because this will deliver much better colors in my opinion and you won't have to do much fixing in post-production. Moving on to exposure, I use both automatic and manual exposure with my time lapses depending on the scene. So if I'm shooting a time lapse of sunset, sunrise, or maybe I'm on a cloudy day and the lighting changes drastically from like cloudy, sunny, I would use automatic settings because it's much more convenient. The camera will adjust the exposure for me depending on the light, and in these conditions the lighting will change a lot, and I think using manual settings with these conditions is going to be very hard. You cannot predict what the lighting is going to be for the next 10 minutes on a cloudy day, because maybe you're going to have like clouds, it's going to be dark, and then 10 minutes later you're going to see the sun and it's going to be super bright. So for these conditions where you can't really predict the lighting situation, I would use automatic settings. However, I would set the maximum ISO to 800 to reduce the noise as much as possible, and also I would use ND filters to lower the shutter speed in here below 1/200 to get some motion blur in the time lapse. So for example, at the moment the shutter speed is set to 1/2000, and with this shutter speed you're not going to get any motion blur whatsoever. It's going to look very boring. But if I'm going to take one of these filters in here, let's see how ND16 will work here. And here I've set the ND16. The shutter now is set to 1/120, which is more than good enough to achieve some motion blur in a time lapse. The ISO is fairly low. The exposure looks correct on the screen, and I can just press the record button and basically start my time lapse. However, if I'm doing a time lapse in a location like I am in right now, where the lighting is fairly even, and it's not really cloudy, I know it's going to be fairly the same for the next like 30 minutes, I would use manual exposure to completely lock the exposure and use as low ISO as possible to reduce the noise as much as possible. So let me show you exactly how to do that. Let's go here, exposure, set it to manual, and the first thing I'm going to do is set the ISO to 100 to make the picture basically as clean as possible. And then I'm going to set my shutter speed to whatever I want, depending on how much motion blur I want. I usually like being below 1/50 because I like having a lot of motion blur in my time lapses. But if you don't like it that much, you can set it a bit higher. It's all honestly personal preference. It's not like there's one specific setting that it's best to use. I would say it depends on the scene, on what is moving in the frame, but I mostly like being below 1/50. So let's do it in here. Probably gonna set it to about here. 1/20, 1/15 is gonna be just fine. And if I'm gonna look in here, the EV says +0.0, which means I'm roughly properly exposed. However, if I look in here in the middle, I can see this white spot, which means that this spot in here is probably overexposed. So it's better probably to slightly reduce the shutter in here to preserve the highlights, because you can always lift the shadows in post-production. Again, you're shooting raw, so you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to adjusting the exposure in post-production, which I will show you how to do everything later on in the video. So I might as well slightly preserve the highlights in here, and then later on, if the image is going to be dark in these areas around the light in here, I can bring up the shadows in post-production and have somewhat of an even exposure throughout the whole frame. So I think somewhere around here looks good. 1/30 shutter, 100 ISO. The shot looks somewhat well exposed. The EV is set to -0.3, which is somewhat okay. Let me just start the time lapse and wait here for like 20 minutes. Hopefully some people will walk around and make it a bit more interesting. And then later on, I'm gonna come back home and show you exactly how I stitch all these raw images and then how I color grade everything in Davinci Resolve to get the absolute best image quality from the Action 5 Pro when doing raw time lapses. Alright, I'm back home now. Let me show you how I transfer all the time-lapse files from the camera to the computer, then stitch everything together and color grade everything inside Davinci Resolve. So first thing I'm going to do is connect the camera to my computer with a simple USB-C cable because I've recorded the time-lapse on the internal storage of the camera because I ran out of space on the micro SD card. And now I have these two folders in here, and here on the right I have a time-lapse folder that I've created on my computer to copy the files to. So let me go in here to the Osmo Action folder, which is the internal storage of the camera, then go to the TCIM folder, and here you will see a time-lapse folder, and inside this folder it will separate the time lapses depending on the session. So each time lapse is going to be on a separate folder. I'm going to select this number 2 time lapse, which is the last time lapse I did with this camera. And as you can see, it created 283 DNG raw pictures. I'm going to select all, copy, go to this folder and just paste. And wait for it to finish and go to Davinci Resolve. Alright, just finished copying the files to my computer. I'm going to eject the camera and also the SD card in here. And I'm gonna go to Davinci Resolve, go to the media pool in here and just navigate to the time-lapse folder that I've created. So Action 5 Pro time-lapses, then I put it in here, time lapses, and here I have a bunch of folders that I've created for the other time lapses that I've done with the camera, but the last one was this one, time lapse out. Gonna open this, and as you can see, Davinci Resolve basically stitches the raw files for me. I don't have really to do anything. I can just, I can preview this if I want to, like so, and I can just drag and drop it on my media pool in here, then go to the edit page and just put it on my timeline like so. And I can preview this if I want to. I can go and animate this. Like I said, I'm shooting in a 4:3 aspect ratio, so I have slight more vertical space to work with when cropping in and moving the image from down, up or down. You can also go in here in lens correction, right? Because like I said, the camera will not do the standard D-warp field of view lens correction in camera. So you'll have to do it in post-production. If you want to have the straight horizontal and vertical lines, you can go in here. Where is it again? Lens correction, and then just, stretch out the edges of the frame to remove at least slightly the fisheye effect from the camera. And this is the before and after, before and after. Now to color grade this, if you're using Davinci Resolve, it's very easy and you can actually work in the raw color space to get the widest dynamic range from the raw files of the camera. I'm gonna go to the color page in here, make sure I select the time-lapse file, close this, and then I'm gonna go in here, which is camera raw, and I'm gonna select here full resolution to get the absolute best image quality from the raw file. Then I'm gonna go in here and select clip and make sure the gamma is set to sRGB because the color space of raw, as far as I know at least, is sRGB. I mean the gamma of raw is sRGB. And I'm gonna select color space Rec 709 because I want to convert the raw file to Rec 709. And then I'm also going to convert the raw file to the color space. I mean, not the color space, the color space of my timeline, which is Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. However, if you are working in a Rec 709 color space, you don't have to do any further conversions. You just do all these things in here and that's it. You can just add nodes and do whatever you want. But because I am in a Davinci Wide Gamut, I'm working in a Davinci Wide Gamut color space, I have to convert this Rec 709 file now to Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. So let me do that. I'm gonna go to my node trees, select this sRGB node tree, and I'm just gonna change in the input device transform the color space to Rec 709, because here it says Rec 709 sRGB. I'm going to set the same thing, Rec 709 sRGB, and I'm going to Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. And on the output device transform, I'm going from Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate to Rec 709 for my final output. Now, before you go in here and start adjusting the white balance, exposure, and all this stuff, I would recommend getting your shot to a good position in here, because these sliders in here, as far as I know, are working in the raw color space of the image. Let me show an example. So if I'm gonna take the exposure in here, look how beautifully it changes around, right? Whereas if I'm gonna go to this exposure node in here, which is in a Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate color space, it's gonna behave slightly differently, as you can see. It's a bit softer, I would say, but it doesn't behave in the same way as in here. As far as I understand, these sliders in here work in the raw color space of the file, and in here in the nodes you are working either in the Rec 709 color space if your timeline color space is set to Rec 709, or in the Davinci Wide Gamut color space if you are set to Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate like myself. So that's why I would highly recommend putting your image to a good starting point in here and then do further adjustments in here. So let me do that. I'm gonna slightly increase the shadows in here. As you can see, I can recover a lot of information from the shadows. I'm gonna put it in here roughly, maybe slightly increase the exposure because it's a bit too dark. As for the highlights, like I told you before, where's the highlights? I cannot really recover this information in here. It looked white on the screen, which is why I said if it's like white and too bright on the screen, it's pretty much impossible to recover in post-production. Also, if you look at the waveform in here, you can see that it's completely flat, which means it's completely crashed. You can't really recover this, but I'm gonna slightly bring it down just to make it look a bit better, I guess. Maybe slightly increase the contrast and slightly increase the saturation to something like this. Maybe decrease the shadows a bit, somewhere around here, and maybe play around with the white balance just to get my shot to something a bit more neutral. Let's put like 4,500, 4,900, maybe like 5,200, slightly warmer, I think looks better. Maybe the tint as well. I can slightly reduce, I guess, the red tint from the camera. Something like this, like 15 with the tint works just fine. And I think this is a good starting point. Now I can go in here and do further adjustments. Like I can take my balance node in here and tweak my white balance a bit more. Something like that. It's a bit too blue. Something like this. I can add a bit more contrast if I want to, right? And then I can add power windows if I want to, or I can go to the enhancer and add like a creative look. Let's go add like a film emulation in here. Let's go vision to 50D. Push this around to maybe something like this. I don't know. Select the print. Let's go with Fujifilm. Play around with this. Actually, it looks a bit too blue for me. I don't like it. Let me go to Supra maybe. Yeah, something like this looks a bit better. Then I can go maybe to my skin node, to my HSL node in here where I adjust the colors. I don't like the color of the temple, so I'm gonna play around with this. It's probably gonna be skin. Basically, I'm color grading this exactly as I would color grade a normal MP4 file from my Action 5 Pro, from my camera. So I think something like this is okay. I mean, this is just to show you as an example. It's not like a color grading tutorial. You can do whatever you want in here, exactly like you would do with any video file. And I think it looks pretty good. Let me preview this 1 second. The time lapse is a bit boring because there were not a lot of people walking around and stuff, but I think the color grade looks kind of nice. Alright, so I think this is it for today. I hope you find this video to be informative and useful, and honestly, I'm very impressed on how easy it is to get fantastic looking time lapses on the Action 5 Pro, mainly because it's super easy to set up and the image quality is just fantastic. And of course, the camera shoots directly DNG files, and if you're using Resolve, you don't have to convert anything, just put it in a folder, import to Resolve, then convert the raw files to either Rec 709 or Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and basically color grade everything as you would a normal video clip. Regardless, this was The first time that I actually put an effort in shooting time lapses with any of my cameras, so I also learned something new. And if you have any tips, questions or comments about whatever, let me know down below. And I guess I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.